Pride is a cold roommate. For the past 6 weeks, it had been my only one, occupying the empty side of a bed I could no longer afford and whispering insults in the hollow echo of an apartment I'd once called home. Now, it had followed me here, to this stranger's spare room, a space so devoid of personality it felt like a blank page I had no ink to write on. I wasn't looking for another woman. God, I wasn't. I was looking for a temporary fix, a port in the storm of my own making. My life had capsized so spectacularly that all I could manage was to cling to this piece of driftwood I'd found on a queer housing page online. Room for rent, short term, quiet artist's apartment, no drama. It was the no drama that sold me. I had enough of my own to produce a 10-season tragedy. The room smelled of latex paint and old dust. A single bed was pushed against one wall, a skeletal metal desk against the other. A window looked out onto a brick wall, a view that perfectly matched my future prospects. My belongings were a pathetic mountain range of cardboard and packing tape in the center of the floor. Each box was a monument to a life dismantled. Kitchen. Books. Sentimental crap I should have thrown away. I nudged the last one with my toe. Inside, I knew, was a framed photo of Chloe and me, laughing on a beach somewhere I could no longer afford to visit, a future I could no longer afford to imagine. I'd told myself I'd throw it out. Pride, that cold roommate, had insisted I pack it. I sank onto the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning in protest. My own bones ached in sympathy. The silence of the apartment was immense, broken only by the distant groan of city traffic and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I was a ghost haunting someone else's space. The owner of the apartment, my new landlord/roommate, was named Lena. We'd had exactly one 5-minute video call where she'd seemed calm, grounded, everything I wasn't. She had dark, kind eyes and a voice like warm honey. And she hadn't asked too many questions about why a 32-year-old graphic designer suddenly needed a cheap room with no lease. She just nodded and said the room was mine if I wanted it. I wanted it like a drowning woman wants air. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. My entire body went rigid. It was the first sign of life I'd heard since I'd let myself in, with the key she'd left under the mat. The door to my room was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I saw a shadow pass. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, padded towards the living room. I held my breath, listening. The sound of a bag being set down, a soft sigh. She was home, my landlady, the woman whose quiet life I was about to disrupt with the hurricane of my own failure. I should go out there, say hello, be a normal human being. But the thought of performing normalcy felt like running a marathon with 2 broken legs. Pride whispered, "Stay. Here. Don't let her see you like this." Weak. Pathetic. I listened, curling my fingers into the thin comforter. I could just stay in here. Forever. Order food. Emerge only for the bathroom. It was a viable plan. Then came the scrape. A heavy dragging sound from the living room, followed by a soft grunt of effort. My box labeled books was out there. The one the movers had bitched about. The one that probably weighed more than I did. I'd left it just inside the front door, too exhausted to haul it another 20 feet. She was trying to move it for me. A wave of shame, hot and sharp, washed over me. I was officially the pathetic new roommate. Pushing myself off the bed, I cracked the door open wider. Lena had her back to me. She was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and worn jeans, and her dark hair was pulled back in a loose bun. Even from here, I could see the defined muscles in her back and shoulders tense as she tried to shove the box across the wood floor. It barely budged. Don't worry about that," I said. My voice came out as a croak. She startled, turning around. Up close, her calm was even more pronounced. Her face was strong-boned and serene, her dark eyes holding a steady, unnerving clarity. She wasn't beautiful in the way Chloe had been, all sharp, dazzling angles and performative glamour. Lena's was a quieter, more elemental beauty, like a river stone smoothed by centuries of current. A faint scent drifted from her, something clean and earthy like sawdust and citrus. "Hi," she said, her voice just as warm as it had been on the phone. She offered a small, unforced smile. I didn't want it to be in the way. "It's fine. It's my problem," I mumbled, stepping out into the hallway. My bare feet were cold on the floorboards. I felt exposed, a mess of frayed nerves and a wrinkled t-shirt, standing before this monument of quiet capability. "It's heavy," she stated simply, looking at the box. "What's in here, gold bars?" A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "Something heavier. Russian literature." Her own smile widened, reaching her eyes. "Ah, the weight of existential dread." She wiped her hands on her jeans, a gesture that was both casual and incredibly precise. I couldn't stop looking at her hands. They were strong, with long, deft fingers and clean, short-trimmed nails. There was a small, faded scar across her right knuckle. They were hands that made things. "I'm Lena," she said, extending one of those hands. "Eli," I replied, my voice a little stronger this time. I took her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm and slightly calloused. The contact was like a low-voltage current, a brief, surprising spark in the numb fog of my existence. I pulled my hand back a little too quickly. "Welcome, Eli," she said, her gaze steady. She wasn't interrogating me with her eyes, just seeing me. It was almost worse. "Let me know if you need anything. The Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Help yourself to coffee." "Thanks." I gestured vaguely at the box. "I'll get that out of the way." "We can do it together," she offered, already bending her knees. "No, I've got it." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, sharp and defensive. Pride, my terrible roommate, speaking for me. Don't accept help, don't show weakness. Lena straightened up, her expression unreadable. She didn't look offended, just observant. She gave a slight nod. "All right, well, I'm going to go wash up. The bathroom's all yours after if you want a shower." She disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with the box and the lingering scent of sawdust and citrus. I stared at the cardboard behemoth. My problem, my dread. I wrapped my arms around it, bent my knees like you're supposed to, and heaved. A sharp pain shot through my lower back, and the box didn't move an inch. Defeated, I let it drop with a thud that echoed the hollow space in my chest. I leaned my forehead against the rough cardboard, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over me. I was too weak to even move my own baggage. It was a metaphor so painfully obvious, it could have been written by one of the Russians in the box. From the end of the hall, I heard the gentle, steady sound of the shower turning on. I was not alone, and that, I realized with a sudden sinking feeling, was the most terrifying thing of all. The first week was a masterclass in avoidance. I became a creature of the early morning and late night. I'd slip out of my room when I heard Lena's shower start, make coffee in the shared kitchen with the tense silence of a bomb disposal expert, and retreat back to my cave before she emerged. I worked from my skeletal desk, churning out bland corporate logos and website banners, the digital equivalent of beige paint. The work was uninspiring, but it was freelance. It paid the rent, this new humiliatingly low rent, and it allowed me to remain a hermit. I learned the rhythm of her life through sound, the soft thud of her footsteps in the morning, the low hum of a sander from what I assumed was her studio in the back of the apartment, the scrape of a chair as she sat down to eat, the murmur of her voice on the phone, always calm, never raised. She was a ghost of a different sort, a peaceful presence I was determined to keep at arm's length. My own life was a stagnant pond. I talked to no one except for clients via email. My phone, once a constant source of Chloe's demanding texts and our friends' cheerful invitations, was silent. They were her friends, I reminded myself, not mine. When you surgically remove a person from your life, you find out just how many other vital organs were attached to them. One afternoon, desperate for a change of scenery that wasn't a brick wall, I ventured into the living room. Lena was out. The space was beautiful in a minimalist lived-in way. A comfortable-looking sofa, a few towering plants, and shelves filled not with books, but with smooth, organic-shaped ceramic pots and carved wooden objects. Her work. I ran my fingers over a dark polished bowl, its surface as smooth as river water. It felt alive in my hands. There was a quiet confidence to everything in this room, a sense of purpose. It was Lena's world, and I was just a temporary satellite in a decaying orbit. My curiosity got the better of me. I crept down the hallway towards the back of the apartment, drawn by a sliver of light from under a closed door. The low hum of machinery was off today. I pressed my ear against the wood, hearing nothing. I shouldn't. It was an invasion of her privacy. But the need to understand the woman I was living with, this serene, self-contained planet, was a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. My hand was on the doorknob before I'd even decided to turn it. The room was bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. It smelled intensely of cedar and wax. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in tools I couldn't name. Blocks of wood, in various states of transformation, sat waiting. In the center of the room, on a pedestal, was a half-finished sculpture. It was a human figure, carved from a pale, creamy wood, its limbs unfolding like a flower. It was breathtaking. It was also intensely, achingly vulnerable. I stepped closer, mesmerized. I could see the fine lines from the chisels, the care in every curve. This was what she did when she was alone. She took blocks of wood and carved out their souls. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the surface, wanting to feel the texture, to understand the work that went into it. It's linden wood. It's soft, easy to work with. I gasped, snatching my hand back as if I'd been burned. I spun around. Lena was standing in the doorway holding a mug. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. Her expression was that same infuriatingly calm canvas. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, my face burning. "I shouldn't have. The door was. I was just." "It's okay," she said, taking a step into the room. She looked at the sculpture, not at me. "She's not finished yet." "It's incredible," I said, the word feeling small and inadequate. "Thanks." She took a sip from her mug. "I saw you in the living room earlier. You were touching that sycamore bowl." She said it as a statement of fact, not an accusation. "You have a very gentle touch." My blush deepened. She'd seen me? How long had she been watching me? The thought made my skin prickle. I, I'm a designer. I appreciate good form." "I can see that," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. "You're quiet, but you're always looking, taking things in." I felt seen in a way that was profoundly uncomfortable. Chloe had looked at me, but it was always as a reflection of herself. Lena seemed to be looking into me, past the walls, past the pride, to the shaky foundation underneath. "I should get back to work," I muttered, needing to escape the intensity of her gaze. "Eli," she said, her voice stopping me at the door. I turned back, my hand tight on the knob. "You don't have to hide in your room. This is your home, too. For as long as you're here." Her words were kind, meant to be a comfort, but they landed like stones. For as long as you're here. A reminder of my transience. A reminder that this beautiful, calm world was not, and never would be, mine. I gave her a tight, brittle nod and fled back to the safety of my beige room, the scent of cedar clinging to me like an accusation. That night, my pride and I had a long, silent argument. "She's just being nice," I told myself. "She pities you." Pride agreed. It told me to build my walls higher, thicker. Don't get comfortable, don't get attached. This was a stopover, not a destination. But as I tried to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the image of her hands, or the unfinished sculpture so full of grace and vulnerability. For the first time in a long time, I was curious about someone other than myself, And that, more than anything, felt dangerous. The weather broke 2 weeks into my tenancy. The sky, which had been a placid blue for days, turned a bruised purple gray. A low, guttural rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and the wind began to howl, rattling the window in my room. A storm was coming, a real one. I'd always hated storms. They reminded me of things ending. Chloe had loved them. She'd drag me out onto our tiny balcony to watch the lightning, her face lit by the flashes, beautiful and terrifying. She'd called the chaos romantic. I just felt small and exposed. I tried to work, but the flickering lights and the rising shriek of the wind made it impossible to concentrate. The building groaned around me. I could hear Lena moving in the apartment, the soft, sure-footed sounds of her closing windows, the clink of glass as she put something away. She was preparing, battening down the hatches. I was just sitting in my room, waiting for the roof to cave in. Then, with a final violent flicker, the lights went out. The hum of the refrigerator died. My laptop screen was a lonely beacon in the sudden, profound darkness. A clap of thunder, louder this time, cracked directly overhead, and I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. The ensuing silence was heavier than before, thick and absolute. "Eli, you okay?" Lena's voice came from the living room, calm and steady through the dark. "Yeah, fine," I called back, my voice tight. I was not fine. I was 32 years old and afraid of the dark. Another jewel for my crown of failures. My laptop battery was at 40%. I could stay in here, I could. But the silence from the other room was unnerving. What was she doing? Was she okay? Against my better judgment, a sliver of concern for someone other than myself pierced through my self-pity. I felt my way out of my room and into the hallway. The apartment was a geography of shadows. The only light came from the frantic, strobing flashes of lightning outside, momentarily illuminating the space in stark black and white. In one of those flashes, I saw her silhouette in the living room, standing by the window. "The whole block is out," she said, her voice placid, as if she were commenting on the mail. "Great," I muttered, hugging my arms to my chest. Another flash of lightning lit her face. She was looking out at the storm, a small, thoughtful smile on her lips. She wasn't scared. She looked interested, like Chloe used to. The thought sent a pang of something ugly through me. "I have candles," she said, turning from the window. "And a gas stove. I can make us some tea if you want." Tea, in the middle of a biblical deluge. It was the most Lena thing I could possibly imagine. Part of me, the proud, stubborn part, wanted to refuse, to retreat back to my dark room and sulk alone. But the other part of me, the part that was cold and scared and tired of being alone, was desperate for a cup of tea. "Okay," I said, the word barely a whisper. I followed her shadowy form into the kitchen. She moved with an easy familiarity in the dark, her hands finding things by touch alone. There was the rustle of a drawer, the strike of a match. A small, brave flame flickered to life, and she lit a thick pillar candle, placing it on the counter. The warm, dancing light pushed the most oppressive shadows back, creating a small island of safety in the dark kitchen. She lit a few more, placing them around the living room, and the apartment transformed. The stark, modern lines softened. The wooden sculptures on her shelves seemed to glow, their shadows long and dramatic. The space felt older, more intimate, a cave against the raging storm. I stood awkwardly in the doorway as she filled a kettle and lit the gas burner with a long match. The hiss of the gas and the whoosh of the flame were comforting sounds. She moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. No wasted steps, no fumbling, just competence. "There are blankets in that chest by the sofa," she said over her shoulder. "Grab a couple. It gets chilly in here when the power's out." I did as I was told, feeling like a guest, a child. I pulled out two thick woven blankets. One was a deep ocean blue, the other the color of moss. They smelled faintly of cedar, like her workshop, like her. I brought them over to the sofa and sat down, wrapping the blue one around my shoulders. She brought two steaming mugs into the living room and set them down on the coffee table. She'd lit a few more candles in here, and the room was filled with a soft, flickering glow. She sat in the armchair opposite the sofa, curling, her long legs underneath her. In the candlelight, her face was all soft shadows and warm highlights. The storm raged outside, a constant barrage of wind and rain against the windows. But in here, it was preternaturally still. "Chamomile," she said, gesturing to my mug. "Good for frayed nerves." Was I that obvious? I took a sip. The tea was hot and floral, and it warmed me from the inside out. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the storm and the soft sip of our tea. It shouldn't have been comfortable, this silence. With Chloe, silence was a weapon, a void that demanded to be filled with apologies or accusations. But with Lena, it was just space, room to breathe. "So," she said, her voice soft, "what's in the box of sentimental crap you should have thrown away?" My heart stuttered. She'd read the label. Of course she had. I felt my cheeks flush, even in the dim light. "Just stuff," I mumbled into my mug. "From before?" she asked gently. She didn't need to specify what before meant. My entire posture screamed before. I hesitated. The candles, the storm, the chamomile. It was a conspiracy of vulnerability. The walls I kept so meticulously maintained felt porous, leaky. I took another long swallow of tea, the warmth giving me a false sense of courage. "Yeah," I finally admitted. "From before. My ex. We were together for 5 years. Lived together for 4. Lena just nodded, her eyes on the flickering candle flame between us. She didn't say "I'm sorry" or "that's rough" or any of the other useless platitudes people offer. She just waited, letting me fill the space. She decided she wanted something different," I said, the words tasting like ash. It was the most sanitized, corporate-approved version of the story. Chloe hadn't just wanted something different. She'd found it, with someone else, while still living with me, sleeping in our bed. She'd dismantled our life with the casual cruelty of a child pulling the wings off a fly. She told me she needed me to move out because her new girlfriend was moving in. The apartment was in her name. The life was in her name. I had been a guest there, too. I just hadn't realized it until I was being asked to leave. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "You said no drama." "I said no drama," Lena corrected gently. "I didn't say no life. Life is dramatic." She looked at me then, her gaze direct and free of pity. It's hard when someone else gets to write the ending to your story. The simple, profound truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. That was it. That was exactly it. My story had been hijacked. I hadn't just lost a partner and a home. I'd lost my own narrative. I felt a stinging in my eyes and looked down at my mug, blinking rapidly. I would not cry in front of this calm, capable woman. I would not. "Yeah," I whispered. "It is." We fell back into silence, but it was different this time. It was a shared silence, weighted with the small, heavy truth I just offered up. Outside, the storm began to recede, the thunder moving off into the distance, the rain softening to a steady rhythmic drumming on the roof. The crisis was passing, but inside, in the warm, flickering light of Lena's living room, something new and fragile and terrifying had just begun. I had let her see me, just a little, and she hadn't looked away. The power remained off through the night and into the next day. The city outside our window was a mess of downed branches and dark traffic lights, but inside the apartment, a strange, quiet domesticity had taken hold. We made breakfast on the gas stove, a shared ritual of cracking eggs and brewing coffee in a French press. The awkwardness of the first week had evaporated in the heat of my small confession. It was replaced by something softer, more tentative. I found myself watching her. I watched her hands as she sliced an avocado with practiced ease. I watched the way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. I watched the small, thoughtful frown she got when she was concentrating on pouring the coffee so it wouldn't spill. I was gathering details, hoarding them like treasure. Her scent, that mix of sawdust and something clean and citrusy, was becoming my favorite smell. My brain, which for weeks had been a static-filled loop of resentment and regret, was slowly tuning to a new frequency. Lena. After breakfast, she retreated to her studio. "I can work without power," she'd said with a small shrug. "Chisels don't need to be plugged in." I was left in the living room, adrift. My laptop was dead. My phone was at 5%, reserved for emergencies. I couldn't work. I couldn't distract myself with the meaningless scroll of social media. I was left with nothing but my own thoughts and the contents of a dozen cardboard boxes. With a sigh, I decided to tackle the one labeled books. If I was going to be trapped in the 19th century, I might as well have the appropriate reading material. I dragged the box into the living room and began to unpack, stacking Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov onto the empty bottom shelf of Lena's bookcase. It felt good to do something physical, to create a small pocket of order in the chaos of my life. As I worked, I could hear the faint rhythmic sound of a chisel tapping against wood from her studio. Tap, 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 scrape, tap. It was a steady meditative sound, a creative heartbeat inside the quiet apartment. I found myself timing my movements to it, placing a book on the shelf with each soft tap. We were in separate rooms, engaged in separate tasks, but we were working in rhythm. The thought sent a strange, warm flutter through my chest. When I finished with the books, the shelf looked much better. My somber, serious Russians looked a little out of place under Lena's serene wooden sculptures. But it was a start. It was a piece of me, integrated into her space. I moved on to the box labeled kitchen. Mismatched mugs, a chipped serving platter I'd bought with Chloe, a set of expensive knives Chloe had insisted on. I unwrapped a small hand-painted ceramic bowl, a souvenir from a trip I'd taken alone years ago. It felt fragile in my hands. I ran my thumb over its smooth, cool surface. "That's beautiful." Lena's voice made me jump. She was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping her hands on a rag. She must have been watching me again. "Just another piece of junk," I said, my default self-deprecation kicking in. "No, it's not." She walked over and gently took the bowl from my hands to examine it. Her fingers brushed mine, a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt up my arm. The glaze is incredible, and the form, it's a little imperfect, but it has character. It feels honest. She looked from the bowl to me. "Where did you get it?" "A market in Santa Fe a long time ago. Before—" I trailed off. "Before," she finished for me, her voice soft. She handed the bowl back to me. "You should use it. It's too lovely to be packed away in a box." She went to the sink to wash her hands, and I stood there holding the small bowl, her words echoing in my head. It feels honest. It was such a strange, lovely thing to say about a piece of pottery. It was such a Lena thing to say. That afternoon, she found me sitting on the sofa, staring into space. "You look bored," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm allergic to not being busy," I admitted. "It's when the bad thoughts creep in." "I get that." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Come on, I'll give you something to do." She led me into her studio. The room was even more beautiful in the steady gray light of day. Wood shavings curled on the floor like fallen leaves. The scent of cedar was thick and intoxicating. She led me to a workbench and handed me a small block of smooth, pale wood and a piece of sandpaper. "This is basswood," she explained. "It's what the linden sculpture was before I started carving. It needs to be sanded completely smooth before I can draw the design on it. You just go with the grain, back and forth, steady pressure. She demonstrated on another piece, her strong hands moving with a fluid grace that was hypnotic. "It's boring," she said, looking up at me with a wry smile, "but it's meditative, and it keeps the bad thoughts out." I took the sandpaper and the block of wood. The wood was surprisingly light, its surface cool and smooth. I started to sand, back and forth, following the faint lines of the grain. It was simple, repetitive work. At first my movements were clumsy and jerky, my mind still racing. But Lena worked beside me, sanding her own piece, and the steady rhythm of her movements was calming. The soft shush-shush of the sandpaper was the only sound in the room. Slowly, my mind began to quiet. The frantic hamster wheel of anxiety and regret slowed to a crawl. I wasn't thinking about Chloe. I wasn't thinking about my failed career or my empty bank account. I was just thinking about the wood in my hands, the pressure of my fingers, the fine dust that was starting to coat my skin. I was focused on this one simple, tangible thing. We worked in comfortable silence for what felt like hours. The light outside began to fade from gray to a soft, dusky rose. I ran my fingers over my block of wood. It was as smooth as silk. I felt a small, unfamiliar flicker of pride. I had done this. I had made something. "Looks good," Lena said, her voice making me realize how quiet it had been. She took the block from me, her fingers brushing mine again. This time the contact lingered for a fraction of a second longer. A spark. A question. I pulled my hand back, my heart thumping. "Thanks," she said, her eyes holding mine. "For your help." It was... I struggled for the right word. It was nice. "I know." Her smile was soft and genuine. In the fading light, with the scent of wood all around us, and our hands both covered in the same fine dust, the space between us felt charged, humming with a new and unspoken energy. I had spent the day in her world, learning its rhythms, speaking its language of touch and texture. I had let her give me a piece of her peace, and it had settled somewhere deep inside me. Later that evening, as we ate a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers by candlelight, Lena started to talk. It wasn't a confession like mine had been, born of darkness and desperation. It was a story, offered freely in the quiet intimacy we had built. She told me about growing up in a small town in Oregon, the daughter of a carpenter. She'd spent her childhood in her father's workshop, falling in love with the smell of wood and the magic of transformation. She told me about art school, about the pressure to be conceptual and ironic, when all she wanted to do was make beautiful, honest things with her hands. "I had this one professor," she said, swirling the soup in her bowl. "He told me my work was sentimental, that it lacked a critical edge. He said I was a craftsperson, not an artist." The word, meant as an insult, landed in the quiet room. I thought of my own work, slick, corporate, and utterly devoid of sentiment. I was a craftsperson too, but I had no craft to be proud of. "What did you do?" I asked. For a while, I tried to be the artist he wanted me to be. I made ugly, angry things. Installations out of garbage. It made me miserable. She looked up, her gaze clear and direct. And then I realized he was wrong. Or not wrong, but it didn't matter if he was right. There's no shame in making something with your hands. There's no shame in wanting to make something beautiful. She told me about her first gallery show, the one she'd poured her heart and her savings into. Only a handful of people had come. She'd sold one small piece. She described the feeling of failure, the crushing weight of it. It was a feeling I knew intimately. "I almost quit," she said softly. "I almost got a job in an office. But then I looked at my hands, and I knew I couldn't. This is what they're for." She held them up in the candlelight, those strong, capable, scarred hands. So, I just kept working. Not for a gallery, not for a professor, for me, because the work itself is the point. Her story settled over me, a blanket of understanding. She wasn't some serene, untouchable goddess of competence. She was a survivor, just like me. She had faced down failure and doubt and had chosen to keep building. She had found a way to make a life out of what she loved, on her own terms. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the admiration I felt was so potent it almost hurt. It was tangled up with something else, something warmer and more dangerous, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to have for a very, very long time. The power came back on with a lurch in the middle of the night. The refrigerator hummed to life, the digital clock on the oven blinked 12, and a street lamp outside my window flooded the room with ugly orange light. The spell was broken. The next morning was jarringly normal. The coffee maker gurgled. The television in the living room was on, murmuring the morning news. The magic of the candlelit darkness was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of electricity and a world that had moved on without us. And the awkwardness was back, tenfold. The easy intimacy we had shared felt like a dream. Now, standing in the bright, unforgiving light of the kitchen, I was just the messy roommate again, and she was the patient landlord. I mumbled a good morning and busied myself with the coffee, acutely aware of her presence behind me. I could feel her watching me. Was she regretting her confession? Was she regretting letting me into her world? My mind raced. It was the storm. It was the darkness. It was a temporary truce. And now the war of my own self-imposed isolation had to resume. I had to put the walls back up. It was safer that way. Eli. I turned, my hand tight around my coffee mug. Yeah? She was leaning against the counter, a mug of her own in her hands. She looked tired, but her gaze was as steady as ever. Last night was... She started, then trailed off. It was the storm, I supplied quickly, giving her an out. We were all a little stir-crazy. A flicker of something... disappointment? Crossed her face before it was replaced by her usual calm mask. Right, she said, the storm. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken things. I wanted to say, thank you for telling me your story. Thank you for letting me sand the wood. Thank you for making me feel human for a night. But the words were stuck behind the wall of pride I was frantically rebuilding. Well, I said, hoisting my mug, I've got a lot of work to catch up on. It was a lie. My inbox was empty, but it was the excuse I needed to flee. I practically ran back to my room and shut the door, leaning against it, my heart hammering. What was wrong with me? A woman shows you a piece of her soul, and you repay her by acting like a cornered animal. But the fear was overwhelming. The feeling I'd had in her studio, the warmth that had spread through my chest when she told me her story. It was terrifyingly close to hope. And hope was a vulnerability I couldn't afford. Hope was the thing that had shattered me when Chloe left. I had built my life around the certainty of disappointment. It was the only thing that felt safe. The rest of the day was a study in tension. We were two magnets turned the wrong way, repelling each other in the small space of the apartment. If she was in the kitchen, I stayed in my room. If I heard her in the living room, I waited until she left to get a glass of water. It was a stupid, childish dance, and I was leading it. Late that afternoon, I was at my desk, staring at a blank design file, when a soft knock came at my door. Eli, can I come in? It was Lena. My stomach twisted. Sure. She opened the door and stepped inside, holding something in her hand. It was the block of basswood I had sanded. I wanted to give you this, she said, holding it out to me. I took it, confused. Why? You helped make it. It's the first step. I thought you should have it. She looked around my sterile room, at the bare walls and the single window looking out at a brick wall. Your room could use a little something honest. She used the same word she'd used for my little ceramic bowl. honest. My hand closed around the smooth, silky wood. It was warm from her touch. I looked from the wood to her face. Her expression was open, searching. She wasn't going to let me hide. "Lena, You don't have to talk," she interrupted softly. "Just don't disappear, okay?" And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the piece of wood and her quiet plea hanging in the air. I sank onto my bed, turning the wood over and over in my hands. Don't disappear. It was the opposite of what Chloe had asked of me. Chloe had wanted me to vanish, to make way for her new life. Lena was asking me to stay, to be present. My carefully constructed walls crumbled, not with a bang, but with a quiet, weary sigh. I was so tired of being alone. I was so tired of pride being my only companion. I stood up and walked over to the box labeled "Sentimental Crap." I dug through it, past old letters and ticket stubs, until my fingers found the cool glass of the picture frame. I pulled it out. Chloe and me, frozen in a moment of manufactured joy. I looked at her smiling face, and for the first time I didn't feel a sharp stab of pain. I felt nothing, a dull, distant ache. It was over. It had been over for a long time. I walked out of my room and into the kitchen, where the trash can was. I lifted the lid and dropped the frame inside. It landed with a soft, final thud. Then I took the small block of basswood, the first step, the honest thing, and I placed it on the shelf in the living room, right next to my somber Russian novels. It was a tiny offering, a promise. I wouldn't disappear. The truce held. We didn't talk about the storm or the confessions or the picture frame I'd thrown away. We didn't have to. Something had been acknowledged, a silent pact made. I stopped hiding in my room. I started leaving my door open. I took to working in the living room, my laptop on the coffee table, while Lena worked in her studio. The sound of her tools became the soundtrack to my day, a comforting rhythm that kept the bad thoughts at bay. Sometimes she'd emerge, covered in a fine layer of dust, and make us both tea. We'd sit in comfortable silence, the way we had during the storm. The silence was no longer a void, but a shared space. I became obsessed with her hands. I watched them as she sketched in a notebook, the pencil moving with confident, fluid lines. I watched them as she tended to her army of plants, her fingers gently clearing away a dead leaf. I watched them as she cooked, chopping vegetables with a speed and precision that was dizzying. I imagined those hands on the lindenwood, carving out the vulnerable figure in her studio. I imagined them on me. The thought would arrive unbidden, a flash of heat that made my breath catch. I'd quickly look down at my laptop, my face burning, and try to focus on the soulless corporate logo I was designing. But the image was seared into my mind. Lena's calloused, capable hands tracing the curve of my waist, her thumb brushing against my hip. Our own touches were brief, accidental, but they felt like lightning strikes. Her arm brushing mine as we both reached for the milk in the fridge, her fingers grazing my shoulder as she passed behind the sofa. Each time my skin would prickle and a jolt would go through me, leaving me shaky and breathless. Each time I'd glance at her, searching her face for any sign that she'd felt it too. But her expression was always placid, her calm impenetrable. Was I imagining it? Was this all just a product of my own lonely, desperate mind? One evening, I was struggling to open a stubborn jar of pickles. My hands were slipping on the lid, and I let out a frustrated sigh. "Here, let me," Lena said from behind me. I stepped aside and she took the jar. I watched the muscles in her forearm tense as she gripped the lid. With a single sharp twist, it popped open. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little hoarse. "You have magic hands." She laughed, a low, warm sound that vibrated through the floor. "It's just leverage." She passed the jar back to me, and our fingers brushed. This time, it wasn't accidental. Her fingers lingered on mine for a heartbeat too long, a deliberate, questioning pressure. I looked up and met her eyes. The air in the kitchen grew thick, heavy. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade into the background. All I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. The calm was gone from her expression. In its place was the same raw, terrifying hope that was blooming in my own chest. This was it, the moment where the story turns. She was going to kiss me. I was going to let her. My whole body leaned towards her, a flower turning to the sun. The sharp, shrill ring of my phone on the counter shattered the moment. We both jumped back as if electrocuted. The spell was broken. I stared at my phone, the screen glowing with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Jessica, my older sister. "Sorry," I mumbled, my voice shaking. I snatched the phone off the counter, my hand trembling. "I have to take this." I fled to my room, my heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I leaned against the door, taking a deep breath before answering. "Hey, Jess! Eli, oh my God, you're alive!" Her voice was a familiar blend of affection and anxiety. "I've been calling. You haven't been answering." "I'm sorry, my phone's been weird." I lied. The truth was, I hadn't wanted to talk to her. I hadn't wanted to answer the inevitable questions. "Are you okay? Dad said you moved out. What happened with Chloe? Are you living on the street? I have been picturing you living on the street." "I'm not on the street, Jess," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm fine. I just needed a change." "A change? Eli, you had a beautiful apartment, a stable life. What happened?" Her voice softened. Was it one of those things again? With you and, you know." I knew exactly what she meant. Those things, my relationships with women. To my sister, my sexuality was a recurring illness, a chronic condition that caused periodic, dramatic flare-ups of instability. She loved me, I knew she did, but she didn't understand. She saw my life as a series of failed experiments, deviations from a norm she desperately wanted for me. "It's not a thing, Jessica," I said, my voice cold. "It's my life." "I know, honey, I know, I just worry. This always seems to happen. You get your heart broken and your whole life falls apart." There was a pause. "Listen, why don't you just come home for a while? Mom and Dad would love to have you. You can get back on your feet. Maybe try dating someone. Simpler, a nice guy from town." The suggestion, so casually offered, so deeply misguided, was like a punch to the gut. Go home, regress, pretend to be someone I wasn't. It was her version of a life raft, but it felt like an anchor. "I can't," I said, my voice thick. "Why not? What are you even doing? Where are you living?" "I have a room," I said, my defensiveness rising. "In the city with a roommate." "A roommate? Who? Is she, you know?" The question hung in the air, dripping with implication. Is she one of you? Is this another mistake you're about to make? In my mind's eye, I saw Lena's face, her calm eyes, her strong hands. I felt the ghost of her touch on mine. The anger that rose in me was fierce and protective. "Her name is Lena," I said, my voice shaking with a sudden, furious clarity. "And it is none of your business." "Eli, I'm just trying to help." "No, you're not," I cut her off. "You're trying to fix me, and I'm not broken." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. The conversation had stripped me raw, laying bare all my deepest insecurities, the shame of my failure, the sting of my family's gentle, persistent disapproval, the lingering scar tissue from Chloe, who had proven them all right. This always seems to happen. Tears I'd been holding back for weeks began to fall, hot and fast. A sob escaped my throat, loud and ugly in the quiet room. I slid down the door, curling into a ball on the floor, my whole body shaking with the force of my grief. I wasn't just crying over the phone call, or Chloe, or my lost apartment. I was crying for every time I'd felt wrong, every time I'd tried to fold myself into a shape that didn't fit, every time I'd let someone else write my story. The door creaked open behind me, nudging my back. I hadn't realized I hadn't locked it. I looked up through my tears. Lena was standing there, her face a canvas of concern. The earlier tension was gone, replaced by an unguarded worry that made my chest ache. "Eli," she whispered. I tried to say, "I'm fine," but the words wouldn't come. Another sob ripped through me, and I buried my face in my knees, utterly, completely undone. I heard her step into the room and close the door softly. Then she was on the floor with me, her knees on the rug. She didn't say anything, she just wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a hesitant touch. It was a firm, solid embrace. She pulled me against her chest, and I collapsed into her, my head finding the space on her shoulder as if it were made for me. She was so warm, so solid. She smelled of cedar and chamomile and home. I clutched at the fabric of her shirt, my tears soaking into the soft cotton, and I cried. I cried until I had nothing left. She just held me, one hand stroking my hair, the other rubbing slow, soothing circles on my back. She didn't shush me. She didn't offer platitudes. She just held the space for my grief, absorbing my pain with her quiet, unwavering strength. She was an anchor in the storm of my sorrow. When my sobs finally subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths, I lay limp against her, exhausted. My face was buried in her neck, and I could feel the steady, calm beat of her pulse against my cheek. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice raw. "Don't you dare apologize," she murmured into my hair. "Not for this." I pulled back just enough to look at her. Her face was inches from mine. Her eyes were dark and deep, and they were full of a tenderness so profound it made my breath catch. The candlelight from our almost kiss seemed to have reignited, a soft, warm glow that existed just between us. "My sister," I started, needing to explain. "She thinks I'm a disaster. She thinks my whole life is a mistake because I love women." Lena's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "She's wrong." "I know, but sometimes—" My voice broke. "Sometimes it feels like she's right. Chloe, she was supposed to be it, and she just threw me away, like I was nothing." "You are not nothing," Lena said, her voice fierce. She cupped my face in her hands, her thumbs gently wiping away the last of my tears. Her touch was electric, a searing, healing heat. "You are brilliant, and you are resilient, and you feel things so deeply, and anyone who can't see that is blind." I stared at her, my heart aching with a feeling so big I didn't have a name for it. It was gratitude and admiration and a desperate, soaring hope. It was the feeling of being truly seen for the first time. "Lena," I whispered, the name a prayer on my lips. "Eli," she breathed back, and then the space between us was gone. She leaned in and captured my mouth with hers. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a kiss born of weeks of unspoken tension, of shared silence, of quiet observation. It was firm and sure and deeply, breathtakingly honest. It tasted of salt from my tears and chamomile from her tea, and it felt like coming home. I wrapped my arms around her neck, pulling her closer, desperate to erase any space between us. My fingers tangled in the soft hair at the nape of her neck. This was not the frantic, performative passion I had known with Chloe. This was something else entirely. It was a slow, deep current, a recognition of souls. It was a confirmation of everything I had been feeling, everything I had been too afraid to admit. Her lips were soft and sure against mine, and her hands moved from my face to my waist, holding me firmly, as if she were afraid I might disappear. I wasn't going anywhere. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly grounded. We finally broke apart, both of us breathless. We rested our foreheads together, our eyes closed. The only sound was our ragged breathing. So, she murmured, her voice a low rumble against my chest. The storm. I let out a shaky laugh, a sound that felt foreign and wonderful. Yeah, I whispered back. The storm. This time we both knew it had nothing to do with the weather. I woke slowly, drifting up from a deep, dreamless sleep. The first thing I registered was the warmth, a solid, living heat pressed against my back, an arm draped possessively over my waist. The second was the scent, cedarwood and citrus, and the clean, unique smell of Lena's skin. I was in her bed, in her arms. My cheek was pillowed on her shoulder, my fingers loosely laced with hers on my stomach. My body, which had been a tightly coiled knot of anxiety for months, felt boneless and soft, completely at peace. The memories of the night before came back, not in a rush, but as a gentle, warming tide. The kiss on my floor, the way she led me by the hand to her room, her expression a mix of fierce certainty and gentle care. The slow, deliberate way we had undressed each other, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with our hands and mouths. There had been no drama, no performance, just a quiet, profound intimacy, a mutual unfolding. I lay perfectly still, not wanting to break the spell. The morning light filtered through her blinds, striping the bed in pale gold. Her room was like the rest of the apartment, simple, clean, and full of her. A stack of art books on the nightstand, a single perfect ceramic bowl holding a collection of smooth river stones, a framed charcoal drawing of a forest on the wall. It was a sanctuary. And last night, she had invited me in. I felt her stir behind me, her breathing deepening. Her arm tightened around my waist, pulling me closer against her. Her lips brushed the top of my head in a sleepy automatic gesture of affection. My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. This was so much more than I had bargained for when I'd answered that housing ad. This was terrifying and wonderful, and I had no idea what came next. The roommate question loomed large. The power imbalance. I was paying her rent. I was living in her space. Did this, whatever this was, change that? Did it make it better or infinitely more complicated? Morning, she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. Morning, I whispered back, my voice catching. She pressed a soft kiss to my shoulder blade. You're thinking too loud. I turned in her arms to face her. Her hair was a dark, glorious mess around her face, and her eyes were soft and sleepy. She looked so beautiful, so real. It almost hurt to look at her. I'm good at that, I admitted. She traced the line of my jaw with her thumb, her expression serious. What are you thinking about? I took a breath. No more walls, no more hiding. Honesty. Us, I said. This, me, living here, paying you rent. I don't want this to be a transaction. A small, understanding smile touched her lips. She didn't look surprised by the question. Eli, what happened between us last night was not a transaction. And it doesn't change the fact that you need a place to live and I have a room. But it changes the context. She paused, choosing her words carefully. This, she said, gesturing between us, is real. And the other stuff, the rent, the job, the figuring your life out part, that's real too. We don't have to pretend one negates the other. We can just figure it out. Together. Together. The word was a balm on the raw, frayed edges of my soul. For 5 years with Chloe, together had meant on her terms. With Lena, it felt like an invitation, a partnership. Okay, I said, the word full of a hope that no longer terrified me. Okay. She leaned in and kissed me, a soft, sweet morning kiss that tasted of sleep and new beginnings. It was a promise. Later, after we'd showered and made coffee, a comfortable domesticity settling around us, as if we'd been doing this for years, I sat on the sofa in the living room. Lena was in the kitchen, humming softly as she watered her plants. I opened my laptop. For weeks, it had been a symbol of my failure, a portal to soul-crushing freelance work. But today, it felt different. It felt like a tool. I didn't open my email. I didn't open the file for the bland corporate logo. Instead, I opened a new browser window and typed graphic design positions into the search bar. The results flooded the screen: senior designer, art director, UX UI specialist. A month ago, looking at this list would have sent me into a spiral of inadequacy. My portfolio was stale. My confidence was shot. Chloe had always told me I wasn't ambitious enough. But sitting here, in the quiet warmth of Lena's apartment, with the sound of her humming in the background, and the memory of her hands on my skin, something felt different. I remembered her words from the storm. The work itself is the point. I wasn't looking for my dream job. I wasn't looking for a six-figure salary or a corner office. I was just looking for a start, a way to build something of my own, a way to stand on my own 2 feet, so I could stand beside her as an equal. I clicked on a posting for a mid-level designer at a small independent press. The work looked interesting, honest. I saved the link. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. It was a step I was taking for myself. Lena came and sat beside me, handing me a mug of tea. She glanced at my screen, at the job listings. She didn't say anything, just bumped her shoulder against mine, a silent gesture of support. I leaned my head against her shoulder, breathing in her scent, feeling the solid, grounding presence of her next to me. The road ahead was still uncertain. I had a life to rebuild, a career to salvage, a family to navigate. But for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't look like a brick wall. It looked like an open door. It looked like the woman sitting next to me. Her quiet strength, a promise that I didn't have to walk through it alone. We were just roommates, and then we weren't. We were something more, something undefined and new. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to begin. When you've spent so long believing you're not worthy of a safe harbor, how do you learn to trust the shore when you finally wash up on it? If you've ever had to make that choice, to let go of the wreckage and trust the land, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Don't forget to like the story and subscribe for more.